through the timeline of my application process, and then address some of the critical components individually. So basically, English, which usually comes in an ELT score for Chinese students, a CV, recommendation letter, and research proposal. I will talk a little bit about my background. So this would kind of like give an idea of one example of a successful application. I graduated from Beijing Institute of Technology with a bachelor degree in optoelectronics, information science, and engineering. So basically, what I want to say here is some of you might not have already obtained a master's degree, and that is perfectly fine at Oxford, and you can still apply and get accepted. So my weighted average grade at the time of application was 91.6 out of 100, and my ELT score was quite high, so an overall band score of 8.5, with listening 8.5, reading 9.0, writing 8.0, and speaking 8.5. I had 1 year of research experience before application, leading to 2 SCI publications, 1 second author and 1 third author. But because I came from a bachelor background, that would be quite limited compared to most of you here. I did not use any consultant agency to help with the application process, so it was purely DIY. And now I'd like to go through the timeline of my application. So my first take-home message is start preparing as soon as possible, especially when you're an overseas student and you can't really get in touch much with nominated supervisors in advance. So to make sure I would have enough time to prepare everything sufficiently, I started browsing the admissions website at around March to look for relevant information such as application requirements, documents, deadlines, the college you'd like to apply for, accommodation, scholarships, etc. Of course, at that point, it was for a number of universities, so not Oxford. Not Oxford wasn't the only one, so that took a considerable amount of time. Then from March to July, I focused on other 2 things. So first is my ELT test, and the second is research experience. So you would like to build upon that. But of course, this can also involve like internships, summer camps, etc. Anything that can make you stand out from the other candidates. In August, I drafted the first version of my CV and contacted potential referrers for recommendation letters, and started to send emails to potential supervisors with my CV to see if they would have any vacancies and all. So this means that before this time point, you should have had a basic idea of like which research groups you wanted to apply for, and started to get prepared for that. In September, I obtained all of my recommendation letters and started to write my research proposal. And Oxford usually opens its application portal at around early October. At least that was the case for 2017. So there are usually 3 deadlines, November, January, and March. And the first one is usually around mid-November. I actually finished all my preparation and submitted my application in mid-October, which was just a week or so after the portal opened. And so the second take-home message is try to submit your application before the first deadline instead of waiting till the second and third. If your ideal supervisor only has 1 position, then you want to be that lucky person. Next I will go through some of the major components for application. For Chinese students, you would need an ELT score. So that is something to demonstrate your English level. Potential supervisors will be looking for evidence of the ability to efficiently communicate with colleagues, so that like incorporates both everyday English and technical English, such as like during presentation, your presentation skills, and also to deliver high quality written work, like reports, publications, or even just casual summaries of your work. Those who can demonstrate good oral and written English skills would be potentially more competitive. So this means if you come from a less relevant background probably, but your English is noticeably stronger, you may still be accepted rather than a person from a more relevant background but with weaker English skills. Unfortunately, Chinese students generally score lower in speaking and writing during the IELTS test compared to their listening and reading. So definitely more effort should be put into these two aspects. English requirements would vary depending on your field of study, but there will be like a specific requirement for each of the 4 elements. And I recall that it was mandatory that each of them were fulfilled. So next is CV. Usually no more than 2 full pages are required to make yourself stand out from the other people. Apart from your basic information, it is advisable to point out any research skill or experience that would be helpful towards your DPhil course, such as a good command in certain software, and experience in attending and presenting at conferences, etc. Also, it would be good to describe in more detail the research you've taken up to date, and most importantly, emphasize on which specific parts of the project you contributed to, rather than just say, I took part in something or I led something. And you can use numbers. So say I worked with or I led a group of 6 people to do some project. Yeah, so it's good to use numbers as well. Depending on your subject of study, potential supervisors may be looking for evidence of other factors, so such as public engagement, planning abilities, networking skills, etc. So it's quite important to actually know what is generally valued in your field of study. Yeah, so next is recommendation letter. Oxford requires 3 recommendation letters. So the first question would be, who should you invite? One thing you should not do is to randomly invite the most well-known professors you can possibly approach. While it is true that recommendation from well-known professors in the field would have some advantages, the most important factor is actually that he or she knows you well and can give you an in-depth summary of your strengths and research capabilities. Potential supervisors would be looking for sincere recommendations, not just a letter of appraisal. And also the identity of your referrer may also depend on your field of study and personal experience. So your previous supervisors, your course lecturers, internship supervisors, etc., these are all totally fine. And one final remark is that if someone you know that is a contact of your nominated supervisor, then him or her would probably be a good referrer, as it would allow your nominated supervisor to go through your documents in more detail and carefully consider you. And finally, I go to research proposal. So this is quite a subtle component of your application. So basically, you want to demonstrate that you have a good potential to do advanced research. And this comes in the form of, first of all, having a considerable amount of knowledge on the topic that the group is currently working on. So you should read some of the group's papers. Second, you should demonstrate interesting and feasible ideas on the topic that you have, and that which could add something to something new to the field. And finally, demonstrating good technical writing skills, both logic-wise and language-wise, would be a good thing as well. So most of you would have much more experience than me at the time of application. Probably I don't need to go into more details about that. But one thing to note is that you might not end up working on the project that you proposed for. Some supervisors would probably already have had a project in their mind for you to work on. So it would be a good idea to ask about this during the interview after application. And a final remark is there isn't a one-fit-all method for successful admission to your dream institution and dream research group. Many factors are behind this, like whether your group has vacancies, whether your research interests fit the general interests of the group, whether there is just one person stronger than you during application. So the only things you can do now are to know your own strengths and weaknesses and try to make your strengths stand out from the others, and try to submit your application before the person stronger than you. Yeah, so welcome to Oxford. 欢迎申请牛津大学. Thank you. Yeah, so that's the end of my talk.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jai. So we have a question for you. So the question from one of the attendees is, how much importance is given to published papers by potential supervisors?
So I think that mainly depends on, so first of all, which level of study, which stage of study you're in at the moment. So I came from a bachelor background, and it's probably not required for you to have many publications. So basically, at that point, you should have some research experience and get involved in research and try to get involved in publications. But when you're from a bachelor background, publication isn't the main consideration point. But if you go into masters and you apply from that stage, it would probably, I would still think that the supervisor would want to see what the content is about and how the publication is developed, and or rather than just on the number of publications you have. That's just my point of view. Probably others have other opinions and all. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Jai. So our next. Thank you so much. So our next speaker is Nick, and he will talk about his experience. Yes, please, Nick, go ahead.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well. So I will. I'll talk about my experience. I'm originally from the UK, so I don't have as much experience in terms of applying for bursaries and funding for my PhD. But I do think my experience is relevant because I came through a slightly non-traditional. Well, I say it's non-traditional. It's becoming more traditional. I've started to do my PhD through I'm a final year PhD student, I should say, through what's called a doctoral training centre, and these work slightly differently to what Jar has just been talking about, which is the traditional PhD application is you apply to a research group with a project in mind, and then you either do that project or do a project that your supervisor set up, and you hit the ground running as soon as you enter the university. Whereas, sorry, I thought I heard somebody. Whereas a doctoral training centre works slightly differently. The application process requires similar things to what Jar has mentioned in terms of like CVs and letters of recommendation from various supervisors and whatnot. So all of Jai's advice on that still stands, but the layout for it is more amenable to people who maybe have more of an idea of like a general research area that they'd like to work in, rather than a specific group or a specific project that they want to work on. The reason that is because the layout of like a doctoral training centre program it's an extra year on top of the normal 3 years, so it takes 4 years. And that is because the first 6 months of that are training courses. So you do like a bit of background. So my DTC is a biomedical imaging one. So we had courses in introduction to programming, introduction to chemistry, some stuff on microscopy, some courses on MRI, to give you kind of a grounding in all of the research projects research areas that kind of pertain to the broader topic of biomedical imaging in my case. But the same thing stands, regardless of what your DTC is, they will do a similar thing. And then there will be a number of research projects that are basically proposed to the DTC by various groups. And then you will spend 2 blocks of usually about 10 weeks in 2 separate projects. And then you pick one of those and you carry that project forward to a full DPhil. So you can see that in that way, if you go, right, I knew when I went in that I wanted to work in microscopy, but I didn't know specifically what kind of microscopy I want to work in, how much I wanted to work on like the biology side versus the kind of physics and engineering side. And so having an opportunity to both experience some other research groups that I maybe hadn't had much exposure to in my undergraduate, and also to the other nice thing about being able to do a research project is as much as you can go visit a lab and talk to the people there and get a bit of a feel for it. If you actually work in a lab for 10 weeks, you get a very good feel for what the culture of the lab is like, what it's like to work there, what the supervisors are actually like, how hands-on or hands-off they are. So for me, I think that it is better to know what you're getting into, and rather than kind of, especially if you are somebody like me or Jahe who only has a bachelor's, it's an easier route into a PhD, because it's not just bachelor's where you're basically more or less led in what you're doing, to very suddenly now you have to do everything for yourself, because you have these training courses and etc. So yeah, the application is about as rigorous. There's still like interview stages. Depending on the DC you're applying for, usually they have the same kind of deadlines that Joe was talking about, in terms of like November, March, and June usually-ish. And yeah, that's my experience, and I think that it's a very valid route, especially if you are kind of a bit more vague about what it is that you want to do, but you are convinced that you want to do a PhD, that you have maybe a rough idea of the research area that you'd like to work in, but don't have a specific project in mind. And usually they are, as Jai clearly demonstrates, you obviously can apply to anywhere, but Oxford in particular, and with a bachelor's and still be accepted. But usually the doctoral training centres are more amenable to people with just a bachelor's, because again, there's this expectation that they will train you a bit, and so that means that there's less of an expectation for, say, prior publications, or or the kind of the transferable skills you will have acquired by kind of doing a master's or a research master's. Not to say you can't apply to a DTC with a master's. It's still there's still valuable kind of training to be had from that. It's just it may have covered some ground that you have already gone over in the course of a master's. Yeah, and I think most of the other advice that I have, Jahe has already given, so I won't repeat it for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nick. I have a few questions for you, and there is a question from the audience. So the first question is are these CDT schools are just confined to Oxford, or they are across the UK in different universities?
They are across the UK in various institutions, but they are not. Whereas, every institution has PhD students, not every institution has doctoral training centres. So I So a lot of London universities do, Oxford and Cambridge both do. I think some Scottish universities do. Usually it's the kind of the larger institutions that tend to have doctoral training centres. I think so. Like also places like Manchester, Sheffield, those kind of places.
Right. And so, for example, I know about one CDT school. They first let you to do masters in research. For your CDT school, do they ask you to do some kind of degree first before you officially become admitted to the PhD program?
No. So mine, I applied with a bachelor's. There's the kind of year or so of training beforehand, and then they launch you straight into the PhD, and that kind of year is to make up for the skills that they would have anticipated you might have acquired in a master's, but you don't like graduate with a master's at the end of that year. It's just a year of training. One thing I should say that I forgot to mention, so apologies for that. Whilst the general format is that you apply without like a project specific, without a specific project, some CDTs also have like industry collaborations. Actually, quite a number of them do, and those will often have like projects proposed beforehand, and but some of those places may be industry funded. Those people may, if you go for an industry funded place in one of these DTCs, you will usually have a specific project from that industry. So there's less flexibility in terms of the structure I talked about, of getting to kind of sample a couple of potential research projects. But it's also just another route of funding. And I think usually industry funding is more more global, whereas say like if you have a DC that's funded by the EPSRC, usually the funding is only available to European students.
Right. So yeah. So when Randy asked this question, do CDT fund international students? So it means only EPSRC can.
So I happen to be on a DTC that's joint funded by the EPSRC and the MRC, which are just two grant bodies. Depending on the body that funds the DTC, they will have restrictions on on who they have money for, who they can pay. So a colleague of mine who's on the course, he's from South Africa. The DTC does not fund him because he's not an EU student. But I don't know the particulars of every DTC everywhere. So some of them may fund kind of globally students, and equally I don't know how things like Brexit will impact funding sources. You'd have to talk specifically to the people who are running these doctoral training centres to find out. But usually, I believe the most normal thing is that the funding is available to kind of EU students.
Right. And another question is, was it difficult for you to get a PhD, or is it difficult to do a PhD?
So, I mean, I haven't finished my PhD just yet. I have a couple of months left to go. Some of the best advice that I got told is that PhDs are tests of endurance rather than skill. Generally speaking, if you are good enough to have like applied to a PhD and be accepted, you are good enough to finish it. You just have to like slog through it. So and I think most people, by the time they get to a PhD, have already done, somewhere between like 3 and 4 years of school. If you've only got a bachelor's, 4 to 5. If you've got a master's. So I think most people are fairly familiar with just like grinding through a process. But yeah, it's hard work, but I mean, probably as much hard work as like if you say like for me, if I had left with my bachelor's in physics and gone to work for like a laser fabrication company, I imagine it would be kind of a similar amount of hard work. So yeah, I think it's this PhDs occupy this weird middle ground between still study and a job, and I think they just are as challenging as kind of any job in science is.
Right. There is a question about the research proposal. Does it need to be like journal, or it needs to be project specific?
You may want to direct that question to Jahe. For a DTC, you don't apply with a research proposal. You apply like as like a candidate, with your CV and all the rest of stuff. But you don't need a research proposal because they will have a bunch of projects that are proposed by various groups and various supervisors that you will then kind of pick from. So turn over to Jahe or maybe Tamor. I don't know if either of you have an opinion on that.
Well, yes. Yeah, so, at that point, I basically just read a bunch of papers, and so some from the group I wanted to apply for, and some generally in the field. And then, so the project was, the proposal was on a specific project I wanted to do, and it had like a methodology and potential outcomes and all. But when I came over here, I basically ended up doing the project that my supervisor had in mind for me. So I don't think it has to be like a journal paper. Mine was just like 2 pages, I think. Yeah, something like that. Don't know about if Timur has more information on that.
No, I think Jess and Nick explained very well. And with my experience, I think research proposal is not like exactly what you do after your PhD, but they want to make sure if you do understand the relevant, you have relevant research experience, or you have genuine interest in that subject. So for example, in my case, I put a specific material, which was perovskite, and making it some particular application in terms of solar cell, but I ended up doing it some optoelectronic devices with that material. So it's better to write down something that match with their area of interest, but make it try to ideal, and then let's see how does that go at the end.
Yeah, I mean, so it's similar to what I said about the kind of wanting to have people like when you have referees, you want to have people who have like who genuinely know you and can give like an authentic account of what you're capable of doing. It is much like having a research proposal that you are genuinely interested in, that you can talk about at length, because you care about it, is far more important and will be far more successful than just kind of like a bland boilerplate, like, oh, I think this is what they want, but I don't really know or care that much about this project. But yeah, and it is very true that what you will end up doing will kind of morph and change even throughout your PhD. So like my so in Oxford, the kind of the structure is that like basically at the end of each year you have some kind of like interview about where you're at in your research. So at the end of the first year you have what's called transfer of status, and at the end of second year you have confirmation of status, and at the end of third year you have your viva when you submit your thesis. And I think if you looked at my the interview that I gave for my transfer of status of like, here's what my project is going to be about, and then looked at the interview that I gave for my confirmation of status and said, here's what my thesis is going to end up being about, they're all like, they're not like worlds apart. Like it's not like the first one is very much to do with like MRI, and the second one is to do with microscopy. Like it doesn't change there, but the specific outcomes of your PhD will shift and change as you go along, kind of as you kind of run up against brick walls, and as sometimes you kind of get halfway through a project that you're doing and you discover like, oh, there's this really cool thing that I can do, and you put more time into that. So even like, and that's true whether you proposed a research proposal or it's a proposal that your supervisors have put forward. Like it will change from the original remit regardless. And I think that the research proposal is more just to show that you are capable of structuring in your head, here's what research is relevant to this field, to this group, and I can like see openings and kind of that you have some kind of momentum to carry research forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Nick. So let's, we now move to Taimur, and he will talk about his experience and difficulties he has faced.
Hi, so I am Taimur from Pakistan. I am here for my DPhil PhD in engineering sciences, and it's about 3.5 years ago when I started my course at Oxford. Since I get into the Oxford with a conventional way, as Jai explained, so I would say it is quite similar in terms of preparing my application and submitting to the university. So I would start with I don't remember exactly what month I started my course, as Jay explained it, but it was mainly preparing my applications in terms of getting ready for English language requirement. And then once it is ready, then I move to preparing my CV, give it to my previous supervisor, because I did my master's before I came for a PhD. And then based on because since you have a master, you must have did some research project with your supervisor. So he must know you very well throughout that project, how you have made progress. But for the PhD application, you need more than one referees, I believe, 2 or 3. So you may have to pick up other referees as well. Probably I would say the one where you got a better score in your master's, because you can I'm not sure if your previous teachers have remembered you exactly what you did within the course, but you bring your transcript with them and ask them for the reference. Maybe they are more likely to give you a better recommendation, because if you stand out in their course, then definitely you will get a good reference letter. So from then, these are the main 2 things I think that you need to make sure you have it in your hand. Other thing is like your research proposal or I think research proposal for the PhD. You need to make it for yourself, but you have to make it accordingly. The group you are interested in, you have to make sure your research lies with their research interest. It is not something you want to make lasers, but they are working on something very different. So try to prepare these things and make sure there are no errors in terms of the language, because if English is not your first language, there are high chances that you may have some mistakes. And then submit it to the before the deadline. As Joya explained, she said that she submitted it in the first deadline, but I submitted to the second deadline in January. And I would not recommend submit it later than that, because most of the funding in Oxford, you must have to submit your application by January deadline. And if you pass that deadline, you may not eligible to apply for other funding. So if once you submitted it, then finally if you already contacted a supervisor, it's good. They can read your application package and then get back to you on this. If not, then you can straight away get a call for interview or maybe an offer. In my experience, I did not contacted any supervisor before in engineering, but I did contacted 1 or 2 supervisors in physics. So, but turned out my engineering supervisor, who is now my supervisor, he contacted me for an interview, and then we ended up having an offer. So if you make your proposal that stand out, of course, your previous academic credentials, for example, your scores in your master's or maybe in undergraduate, your research profile, if you have some publication that give you benefit to over the other candidates. But of course, your relevancy of research proposal is also important. So this is my experience when I applied for the PhD at Oxford.
Great, thank you, Taimur. Tell us more about various funding resources that are available for a student from subcontinent India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, Sri Lanka?
Well, there are several funding that Oxford offers, and I think anyone from across the world is eligible to apply. But of course, if in that case, it would be more competitive to get. One of the funding is called Rhodes Scholarship that Oxford offers. I remember, I think Pakistan, India, they both are students from Pakistan and India, they both are eligible to apply for that scholarship. But again, the number of scholarships are limited and they are highly competitive. There's a Caledon scholarship as well that people can apply. But again, it is competitive. There's a specific scholarship from Pakistani students, which is called Wikinoon Educational Scholarship. This is for students who apply for PhD or master, a graduate level course in Oxford or Cambridge. So you can get funding from them. Else is there's another scholarship. I don't remember its name right now, but it's provided by a cement factory, Best for Cement, I believe, and they give it one award from a student from Pakistan, but it's just only one. And as long as student is studying PhD, they discontinue the new scholarship. So it will they will offer you the next scholarship once the current student has finished their course. So I think this year they are offering that scholarship again. Other than that, Government of Pakistan has some scholarship, like Higher Education Commission of Pakistan provide financial support for PhD students. There is a scholarship from Punjab government, which is Punjab Educational Endowment Fund. They provide funding if you got admission in the top 50 universities, so you can get scholarship from them as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Taimur. So we will now move to Dahlia, our next and last speaker, and she will talk about her experience. Go ahead, Dahlia.
Hi, thanks, and sorry I was teaching, that's why I'm late. Hi, I'm Dahlia. I'm studying for DPhil biochemistry, and I started in October last year. I'm studying in the Department of Biochemistry, and I'm on the Clarendon Scholarship, which is joined with the Department of Biochemistry and Merton College, which Taimur mentioned. I applied to Oxford because I found a group that I really liked at Oxford, and for biochemical and sort of life sciences things, I would say that maybe on the contrary to what the guys said before, one of the most important things is to contact the supervisor first. I think that's kind of the canon in terms of life sciences. So what I did when I was applying, I contacted different groups at different universities, including Oxford, and I found a group at Oxford that I really liked. And usually in terms of contacting the groups, how I go about it and how I went about it was I wrote a short email introducing myself. I attached my CV and maybe some recommendation letter to the email, and I explained in the email why I'm interested in their research, kind of mentioning specifics. So I said, I read this paper and I liked your group. I learned about your group from a seminar that I went to in my university or seminar. I think it's important to mention specifics because I think group leaders, especially in biosciences, get a lot of emails from a lot of people. So you need to stand out and explain specifically why you are interested in that group, because a lot of people just copy and paste the same email. That's what I did, and I received pretty much email responses from everybody. Some of them said, oh, we don't take students, but thanks for your email. But it's good to know that your email reached people, so put a lot of effort into the email if you are emailing. So after that, I actually went and visited a lot of groups, including the group at Oxford, and I really liked the resources that they had. I liked the fact that the group where I work is connected to a facility that's called Micron, which does a lot of microscopy, because that's what I like doing. So after I found that group and I was convinced that I want to study at Oxford, I looked at the programs and scholarships that I can apply for to be able to do that, because I obviously sort of also wanted a scholarship and I needed it to be able to study at Oxford. And in fact, especially for bio stuff, you can find a lot of groups will list which scholarships and programs they belong to. So which scholarships and programs you can apply for in order to end up in that group. And for some of them, they are rotational programs. So for example, there was a program from Wellcome Trust that I applied for, which included 3 rotations. And so then you have to specify 3 groups. There are also some programs where you apply and you specify 1 group that you want to be with. And that's the program that I'm on now. And it's a program in DPhil biochemistry. The program that I applied for and that I ended up on does not come with its own internal funding. Some of the programs like the Welcome or the DTC, which I'm sure Nick spoke about, I'm sorry, wasn't here. Some of the programs like DTC or Welcome and other programs come with own funding. Mine didn't, but I applied by the January deadline mentioned earlier. So I applied by, I think, 10th of January. And if you apply by that deadline, you are considered for a breadth of different scholarships which Oxford offers, including the Clarendon and some other departmental and college-specific scholarships. And if you do that, some of the scholarships you don't even need to apply specifically for, your application just gets considered. And that's what happened for me. I got considered for the Clarendon Scholarship and I just got awarded it. The scholarship is joined with my department and with my college, so 3 funding bodies kind of come together to fund me. And yeah, basically this was my journey to Oxford. I failed to mention that I'm Polish. So in terms of applying for these scholarships, most of them, including Clarendon, including Welcome, and including the DTC, are available to both British and European nationals. And I know that Clarendon and Rhodes and Welcome are also available to international students. So international students can apply to those. So if you find a group and you see like, okay, they've got different programs and you are an international student, you can check if you'd be able to apply for this program, because sometimes, unfortunately, you need the home or EU status. Now that might even change. We don't know what will happen with this. Fortunately, for me, that was the case. Although Clarendon, as we know, is also available to students from different countries. So yeah, I think that would be it. Please let me know if I should mention something else.
So we have 2 questions. So the first question is, do they entertain someone with an MBA with 8 years of experience, with 8 years of industry experience, but not research experience? So you think that that person has some chance to get into a PhD program?
I would 100% say yes. In fact, in our department, before everything went crazy, we had this meeting, which was like women of the department, and they were talking about their career path. And many of them, I think even half of them, had industry experience before they decided to do a PhD. So they worked in some company or something. Industry experience, not even related to research, is often valuable, because I think when applying for a PhD, they are not looking for someone who's an amazing researcher already. PhD is for you to learn how to do research. I'm learning that every day and failing and learning again. They're looking for someone who's going to be persistent, who will have skills, who will have resilience to pursue their project, who will have the ability to sort of direct themselves and take initiative and come up with experiments. So 100% industry experience and previous work experience shows that, I would say. What I would say in terms of changing from an MBA or changing from not research to research is you need to justify it really well. You need to talk, for example, about your passion, why you became interested in this new thing, why you think you would be good at that, why you think you can apply your knowledge and skills which you gained in industry or in your business job to the research, and how you're going to make that transition. So I think sort of the justification and explanation for why you're choosing to apply for a PhD is the most important thing here. You can do that in your personal statement. That's why it's given there, because if someone looked at your business CV, maybe they would be like, what is this person doing applying to science? But you can explain it really well in nice language in your personal statement, which just proves that your personal statement is important. So yeah, I'd say go for it. MBA doesn't mean that you can't be a researcher.
Right. I'm getting a lot of questions on this thing. So people are asking, is doing a PhD difficult?
Yeah. It is and it isn't. Like for example, yesterday I spent the entire day making figures and it was painful. It took ages. It just was. I'm not gonna lie, it's horrible. But then it gives you the satisfaction because it's the data that you collected. I think the personal aspect of you working on it and it being your data, which your thesis, your name is going to be on your thesis and maybe on a paper, that's a huge thing. And I think that's extremely important for me. This is the reason why I'm doing a PhD. Science fails at all times and forever. There's no lies about that, which is why I mentioned the resilience and persistence. You have to be like made of steel for a PhD. You just have to be ready to repeat the same thing over and over again. You have to be ready to face the fact that it just doesn't work and come up with roundabout routes to get the same thing, or to come up with a different experiment which will prove what you need to prove. It is like hitting a brick wall at times, but I think I think it's a good way as well to figure out if you want to be forever in science or if you don't, because you can manage it even if you don't like it. And if you started it and if you're in it and you're like, oh my God, I'm not sure I want to be a scientist, you can push through until the end and you don't have to do it afterwards. But if you find yourself in it and you enjoy the struggle, you enjoy the creativity that you have to put in to make your experiments work, then it's something for you. So it is difficult, but it's a great experience. It's very character kind of shaping experience, and it can teach you a lot and make you into a more resilient person, I hope.
Great.
If I can just add one thing to that, like you do absolutely like hit brick walls at times, but that's because like the whole point of doing a PhD is you're doing novel research. You're like at the cutting edge. Like that's one of the most like jarring shifts between like undergraduate, you know, even like masters. It's like there's a fair amount of stuff that you do that has been done before, and so it's like, all right, I go into this room to do this experiment and I know what I should get out the other side. Whereas a PhD is not like that. You're going into a room and you're like, I don't know, I think this is what we should get, but maybe it's not the case, and sometimes it doesn't work because you're at the cutting edge of science. And by the time you finish your PhD, it's like you are one of, if not the expert in your particular like niche bit of a field. And you only get that by kind of trying and not succeeding on a bunch of things, because that's how like the scientific method works.
Yes. So there are two questions. So I think we have already answered, but just to be sure that Andy got the answers. So the first question is, should we contact the professors first, and then if they agree on funding only, then we should apply to the university? But I think it is not right. We can apply anyway, right?
So for the programs that I applied for, at least, it says on the website, please do contact the supervisors before. So they strongly suggest you do. But for programs like the Wellcome Trust and rotational programs and the DTC, you don't have to do that because you would have to choose the rotations anyways. It's more than one person. But for programs where you choose one group, you do contact them in advance. So you can do both. I would suggest to email them, because then you also get to know them and find out like what kind of a person and supervisor they are.
Right. And another general question is, we have already answered a lot of time. So so it doesn't matter if someone has a bachelor's degree or master's degree. After bachelor's degree, you become eligible to apply.
Yes. So I think you can apply after bachelor's, and a separate master's. And so, for example, I did an integrated master's, so I don't have a bachelor's degree. So I just did like a master's in one go, 5 years. So you can apply after all three of those.
What I would say, kind of the advice was given to me when I was applying with just a bachelor's. I don't know if Jai got similar advice. Was that whilst you absolutely can apply with a bachelor's, how successful you will be is it's this weird thing where it's dependent on the other people who are applying. So if you apply and the particular pool that you're applying into is everybody else has a master's, then then you're less likely to be successful because of everybody else around you. Whereas if you're kind of applying to a pool that happens to have like an even split, then your chances are better just because of like the people around you. And obviously you can't guarantee what kind of pool you're going to be applying into, which like, partly that's why I was like advised to to consider DTCs, is because you tend to on average have more people applying to those with just a bachelor's, and so your odds are a bit better. So yeah, it is possible, but it just might be the case that you might have has higher odds with just a bachelor's, depending on the program, depending on the lab. Yeah, I figured it's worth to kind of have a sober approach to the odds if you are applying with just a bachelor's.
Yeah, I think if you're applying with a bachelor's, so after the bachelor's degree, some people, at least from my course, I feel like they came out not having that much lab experience, which wasn't like their fault or anything, because it's like you only do like a 3-month project. So what helps, or if someone's planning to apply straight after a bachelor's, I think it would be summer internships and lab experience or any other work experience, because what they want to know for a PhD when you're applying for a PhD is that you know what you're signing up for, which is the lab, the experiments failing, the sort of constant work, which is just like can be solitary and so on. So I think they want to be sure that you know what you're signing up for. And after a bachelor's degree, especially for bio and lab work, I think it might be like not enough for the panel to believe that you know what the work is really like day to day, which is why if you've done a master's, or if you've done like an industrial placement, or you've worked in industry in a lab or whatever, you know what it's like to work in a lab for a year or for 2 years. So that's kind of more sober approach on your behalf, and you're like aware of the fact that it might fail and like what the day-to-day lab work looks like. So if someone's planning to apply after bachelor's, to kind of stand out and to have better chances, I think it's good to have a lot of outside of the university experience, while the master's kind of provides that. And I know some people who like applied after bachelor's, didn't get in, did the master's, and then got in. So
great. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you very much for your time. I hope attendees find it very, very useful, and we all wish you good luck, and hopefully we see some of you in the Oxford. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.